Before you turn out the lights, before the house settles, before your thoughts finally quiet, stay with me for just a moment longer. This is One More Before Sleep, short horror stories meant to be heard in the dark, when the world feels still and your imagination does the rest. These are tales of quiet dread, lingering unease, and the feeling that something isn't quite right, even when everything looks the same as it always has. So get comfortable, lower the lights, and listen closely. There's always time for one more before sleep. I Love You, Daddy. Written by Hill Country Writer. Read by Jaivuc. The sun beat down on my bald head as I continued my trek across the Arizona desert. 3 more miles until I reached my car. Dry heat my ass, I thought as I stopped to wipe the sweat from my face and take a drink. 7 miles into a 10-mile hike, my backpack was significantly lighter as I worked my way through my precious water supply. This was my 4th year performing my annual wilderness hike out into the desert for no other reason than to see if I still had it in me. Pushing 50, I prided myself on the fact that I was tougher than most of my coworkers, despite the fact that I had at least 2 decades on most of them. But, despite my confidence, I could feel time catching up to me. Another couple of years and I'd have to stop these annual excursions or risk injuring myself permanently. I could boast all I wanted, but I didn't heal as fast as I once did. Refreshed, I took a final swig of water before reaching for my walking stick where it leaned against a boulder. I froze as the telltale rattling of a western diamondback broke the still air. Less than 10 feet away, the snake stretched out across the path in front of me. No way had I missed it when I stopped. The snake had come out of nowhere. The snake began to coil, its tail rattling a warning as it stared straight at me, its slitted eyes seeming to burn into my very soul. Slowly, I moved my left hand toward the revolver on my hip, a raging judge, a 6-round revolver, loaded with 410 shotgun rounds for this exact purpose. Time seemed to stop as neither the snake nor I moved to strike. I was fast, incredibly fast, but going against a striking rattlesnake was not a smart move. My hand slapped leather as the snake struck. My gun fired a fraction of a second after clearing leather. The snake's body shredded as the concentrated pellets tore through its body. My heart pounded in my chest as I gasped for air, my body trembling with adrenaline. With shaking hands, I returned my revolver to the holster before fumbling once again for my bottle of water. I froze as once again the sound of a rattle broke the air. Not one, but dozens of them, all around me. As I looked around, I saw countless snakes closing in on me from all sides, their lithe bodies slithering toward me. Dropping the bottle of water, I lunged for my walking stick as I began to run, sprinting for a narrow opening that appeared to be free of the deadly serpents. I ran for 20 minutes straight, pushing my legs as hard as I could as I felt my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, the sounds of the rattlesnakes faded into the background. I slowed to a jog as I tried to regulate my pounding heart. I fumbled for my cell phone, desperate to see how far I was from my car. I was over 5 miles away. I had run in the wrong direction. Exhausted, I looked for any shade I could find where I could stop and rest. After a few more minutes of walking, I found a small outcrop under a boulder. Not quite a cave, but big enough for me to crawl under to get some relief from the sun. while I collected my thoughts. As I crawled deeper beneath the rock, trying to find the coolest spot I could, I pulled out my cell phone. Fortunately, I had a good signal. I would have to eat crow and text my daughter and have her come pick me up. She lived for a good off-road adventure and would love the excuse to bail me out from my annual walk of madness, as she referred to it. Sighing, I began to type out a message, providing her my GPS coordinates so she could come rescue me. Without warning, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell into utter darkness, my last sight the hole of dim light above me as I slammed down onto my back as my head struck a rock, knocking me unconscious. Hours later, the pounding in my head pulled me back to consciousness. I moaned as I brought my hand up to the side of my head. It came away warm and sticky with my own blood. I staggered to my feet as I released the straps of my backpack and let it fall to the ground. My world spun as I staggered to the side, one hand outstretched, looking for a wall. Fortunately, I was close and managed to lean against the wall before succumbing to the dizziness and falling again. I steadied myself with a couple of deep breaths as I reached for my cell phone. It was gone. I had forgotten that it was in my hand when the ground opened and swallowed me. I fumbled for my mini-mag flashlight, something worn habitually on my hip for the last 3 decades, even when going out into the desert sun. I squinted as the soft glow of the incandescent bulb filled the cave. Hope soared as I saw my cell phone on the ground near where I had left my backpack, but fell just as quickly as I stumbled back across the floor to where it lay, to find the screen smashed to bits. Sighing, I sat down next to my backpack to take inventory of my supplies. My 2 remaining water bottles had exploded on impact, soaking the contents of my bag. I held my spare t-shirt up over my mouth, wringing what little water I could from it before using it to clean the blood from the side of my face. Thankfully, the cut to my head seemed to be mostly superficial and had already stopped bleeding. I used my first aid kit to tend to my wound. Amazingly, my head was the only injury, aside from some very sore muscles. I munched on one of the 2 protein bars as I looked at the remainder of my backpack. 6 hollow point 454 Kazul rounds, 1 remaining protein bar, a box of Strike Anywhere waterproof matches, an LED headlamp, and my combat knife. I pulled the knife from its leather sheath and inspected the blade. It had been a present from my daughter for my last birthday. The blade shone with the silver inlay she had commissioned into the blackened blade. The words, "I love you, Daddy," something she had told me every day since she was 5 years old, seemed to glow in the light from my flashlight. I strapped the blade onto my belt opposite my revolver. The 5 remaining shotgun shells were swapped for the 6 hollow point Kazul rounds and put into the pocket of my cargo pants. Deciding to leave the backpack behind, I distributed the broken cell phone, a protein bar, first aid kit, and matches among my other pockets. Taking up my walking stick, I began to explore the small area of the cave in which I had fallen. The hole in the roof of my new prison was too far for me to reach, but the cave seemed to stretch off in both directions, beyond the opening in which I had fallen. I picked a direction at random and began to walk. The LED light on my head made shadows dance across the walls as it bobbed with each step, and the tap, tap, tap of my walking stick's rhythmic impact bounced off the walls. After an hour, I began to notice a foul odor in the air, a scent I was far too familiar with, the smell of death. I rounded a tight bend in the tunnel and froze as I saw an abattoir of death filling the large cavern before me. I fought down the vomit as the smell of putrefying flesh rolled over me. The bodies of hundreds of animals were spread on the floor in front of me. Some were no more than skeletons, their bones picked clean and scattered across the stone floor. Others were in various levels of decay. Near my feet lay a mountain lion, its head bashed in, making it nearly unrecognizable, its belly torn open and intestines devoured. As my eyes took in the scene, an idea began to form in my mind. Soon the idea had solidified into certainty. Whatever creature made this cave its lair, it didn't just hunt for food, it hunted for sport. Many of the animals seemed to be violently mutilated, heads smashed, limbs ripped off bodies and discarded, guts disemboweled and left to rot. My hand went to my holster, the comforting rubberized grip steadying me as I drew and cocked the monster revolver. As I scanned the cavern, my light caught 2 additional tunnels that almost emptied into the chamber of death. The first tunnel was narrow, barely big enough for me to squeeze through sideways. The second looked like a gaping mouth in the side of a rock. A red tongue seemed to protrude from the mouth, a grisly souvenir from years of blood from the animals that had been dragged into its lair. As I began to walk across the cavern floor, trying to avoid all the desecrated corpses, something flashed in the beam of my headlamp. I drew closer. The light revealed a diamond ring winking up at me, the gold band still encircling the ring finger of a severed human hand. I began to tremble, my limbs unwilling to move as I realized that many of the corpses at my feet weren't animals. They were humans, or at least pieces of humans. The human corpses seemed to have been defiled even more than the animals had been. They had been torn into pieces and thrown all over the room. The rush of blood filled my ears as my heart began to hammer in my chest, threatening to burst. My skin burned as sweat broke out across my body. Whatever this creature was, it hated humans. I had to get out. I had to run. Now. I took one step towards the larger tunnel, preparing to sprint as far as I could, desperate to vacate this lair before whatever monster called it home returned. But before I could take a second step, a deep bass growl filled the chamber. The growl wasn't coming from the opening in front of me, but from the chamber behind me. I spun as what I had taken as a pile of animal corpses against a distant wall began to move. My mind screamed at the impossible truth as the creature rose. Werewolf. The werewolf stood on 2 powerful hind legs. Its fur-covered body stood at least 8 feet tall. Its barrel chest and muzzle were caked in matted, blood-soaked fur. The creature's arms, corded with muscles, hung to its knees, each finger adorned with a claw nearly 6 inches long. The creature's eyes looked into mine, burning into me the same way the rattlesnakes had so many hours ago. In the flash of knowledge I still can't explain, I realized this creature had controlled the snakes. I had been herded here like cattle into a slaughterhouse, and now the butcher was ready to have its fun. The werewolf's roar made the cavern tremble, the beam of my flashlight catching the dust knocked loose from the ceiling from the power of that roar. Dropping to all fours, the werewolf charged at me, red eyes burning with hate. I brought my revolver up and fired, the roar of my gun as loud as the creature's as I pulled the trigger. Flames licked from the ported barrel with every shot as the hard recoil punched the gun back into my arm, threatening to knock me down. The first round caught the creature in the bicep, the hollow point round expanding and blowing out the back of the creature's arm, tearing chunks of flesh and bone with it. I adjusted to the right, firing again. The second bullet caught the beast in the stomach. The round, large enough to stop a charging boar in its tracks, barely slowed the werewolf as it closed the distance. I fired again and again, my arm tracking up, sending the next 3 rounds into the creature's chest, neck, and finally the creature's head. The werewolf's head snapped back as the 5th bullet tore through its jaw, sending teeth flying off into the darkness. It crashed to the floor, not 3 feet away from me, its eyes still burning red with hatred as it glared up at me, body broken. I raised the revolver, took aim, and fired. The 6th round tore through the creature's left eye and into its brain. The hollow point bullet mushroomed out, expanding as it ripped through the soft tissue of the creature's brain and blew a hole the size of my fist out of the back of its skull, the kinetic energy of the bullet dragging most of the brain out of the hole with it. The wolf began to shrink in on itself. The fur seemed to dissolve into a fine powder that slipped off the skin and onto the floor. In seconds, the body of a naked woman lay at my feet, the head too disfigured to even be identifiable as human. I fell to my knees and vomited over and over until nothing came out but a thin stream of bile that dripped from my mouth onto the floor. I closed my tear-streaked eyes as I tried to steady my breathing and still churning stomach. The shock of pain that tore through my body ripped a scream of agony from my lungs as my eyes flew open. The woman at my feet was staring at me, her one remaining eye filled with hate as her remaining good arm flailed at me once again. The fingers on the arm had once again transformed into claw-tipped nightmares, and those razor-sharp claws had torn through my cargo pants, skin, and muscle as if they were tissue paper. It was only luck that she hadn't been able to reach the bone. I stumbled back, falling into my own pool of vomit as I watched the woman try to crawl towards me. I fumbled the cylinder of my revolver open, dumping the spent shell casings onto the cavern floor as I desperately patted down my pockets for the remaining 410 shotgun shells. I stared in disbelief as the wounds began to very slowly stitch themselves shut. The eye was still gone, but I watched as bone began to regrow around the blown-apart skull. Finally, I found the shells and shoved them into the cylinders. 5 rounds of snake shot to take down a wounded werewolf. Fueled by terror and rage, I lunged up to my feet and took 2 steps towards the woman. My left leg screamed in protest, but I ignored it as I kicked her in the face, driving her onto her back, stunned. I dropped down on top of her, my knees on her stomach, pinning her body in place as my left hand grabbed the wrist of her transformed hand, pinning it down. When she screamed at me in rage, I shoved the barrel of my revolver into her mouth and pulled the trigger. Screaming with incoherent rage, I pulled the trigger over and over until my brain registered the repeating click of the hammer falling on an already fired shell. The head was a complete ruin, but I was taking no chances. I drew my combat knife and plunged down, burying the blade into her heart. Exhausted and bleeding out, I fell backwards off the corpse and let the darkness take me. Hours later, when I awoke, my leg was healed. If not for the dried blood coating my leg and pooled on the floor, I would have doubted my own sanity. But the wound, along with all the rest of the pain in my body, was gone. The corpse of the woman was still where it had been, my knife still buried to the hilt in her chest, but the skin around my blade had blackened and burned away. The light from my headlamp, which had managed to stay on my head despite all that had happened, reflected the pure silver inlay letters on the blade. I love you, Daddy.